What is a word? Defined by Bollinger and Sears, the word is the smallest unit of language that can be used by itself, meaning a word is the smallest part of a language that can stand alone with its own meaning. Is there a one-to-one relationship between word and meaning? There isn't always a direct match between words and their meanings across different languages, or even within the same language. The word rebuild, as an example. It has two parts, re and build, which together mean to build again. Similarly, disbelieve can be broken down into dis and believe, meaning not to believe. Or tennis player is written as one word in Turkish, lenisi, and cheap is one word in Japanese, yasukatara. But in Spanish, the verb to type is represented by three words, pasar a máquina. This shows that sometimes one word in one language can represent multiple words in another language, and vice versa. Morphemes. Linguists use the term morpheme to describe the smallest unit of meaning in language, different from a word. A morpheme can't have more than one meaning and can't be broken down further. For example, the word inconceivable has three morphemes. In meaning not, conceive meaning think of or imagine, and able meaning able to be. Some morphemes have grammatical functions such as marking plurality, funds, gender, manageress and tense, considered. Others change the class of the word, for instance, from verb to adjective, like to likable, or add a specific element of meaning such as negation to it. Unhappy. Some words consist of one morpheme, need, fast. Sometimes it's clear where one morpheme ends and another begins, but not always, like in the word men, where man and plural blend together. Lexical meaning. Every word has something unique about it, which we call its lexical meaning. This is like its own personality within a language system, shaped by how people use it. While it's hard to break down a word into specific parts of meaning, sometimes it helps to simplify things temporarily to understand them better. According to Cruz, there are four main types of meaning in words and sentences: what they say, propositional meaning, how they make us feel, expressive meaning, what we assume from them, presupposed meaning, and what they bring to mind, evoked meaning. The propositional meaning of a word or sentence is what it refers to in the real or imagined world, like the definition of shirt as a piece of upper body clothing. Expressive meaning, on the other hand, is about the speaker's feelings or attitude, not about what the words refer to. For example, don't complain and don't whinge have the same propositional meaning, but whinge expresses annoyance more strongly. Words can have both propositional and expressive meanings, just one of them, or just expressive meaning, like swear words. Expressive words add emotional emphasis, but don't change the main information. For instance, removing simply from a sentence doesn't change what's said, but it softens the tone. When a translation is described as inaccurate, it is often the propositional meaning that is being called into question. Expressive meaning cannot be judged as true or false. This is because expressive meaning relates to the speaker's feelings or attitude rather than to what words and utterances refer to. Presupposed meaning. Presupposed meaning comes from the rules about which words typically go together with others. There are two types of these rules. Selectional restrictions. These rules depend on the meaning of a word. For example, we expect studious to describe a person, not an object. These rules are usually followed, but can be broken in figurative language. Collocational restrictions. These rules are arbitrary and don't come from the meaning of the words. For example, in English, we say laws are broken, but in Arabic, they are contradicted. These rules can vary more between languages. In English, teeth are brushed, but in German and Italian they are polished, nie Polish they are washed, and in Russian they are cleaned. Because they are arbitrary, collocational restrictions tend to show more variation. Sometimes, it's hard to tell if an awkward phrase breaks selectional or collocational rules. For instance, in a leaflet about men's suits, saying they emanate qualities is awkward because objects like suits don't emanate things, ideas or qualities do. Whether this awkwardness is due to breaking selectional or collocational rules depends on whether you see the rule as related to the meaning of emanate. Evoked meaning. Evoked meaning comes from differences in language use based on dialects and registers. Dialects are different versions of a language used by specific groups, like Scottish or American English. Registers are styles of language chosen for specific situations. They vary based on 1. Field of discourse. Different situations require different language choices, like talking about sports versus discussing politics. 2. Tenor of discourse. Language changes based on relationships, such as how a doctor talks to a patient versus how a parent talks to a child. 3. Mode of discourse. Language varies depending on whether it's spoken or written and what role it plays, like in a speech or a letter. Translating these nuances can be tricky, as it involves understanding the cultural expectations of the audience. Different cultures have different expectations about appropriate language for various situations. The translator must ensure the translation matches these expectations, unless the goal is to preserve the flavor of the original culture. Superordinate. The general word is usually referred as superordinate. Hyponym. The specific word usually referred as hyponym. Examples. When it comes to subject vehicle, we can say that car, track, bus, taxi is hyponym, while the word vehicle itself is superordinate. The problem of non-equivalence. The problem of non-equivalence in translation arises because different languages have different ways of expressing ideas. Semantic fields. Words in a language are often organized into groups based on related concepts. For example, words related to temperature, like cold and hot, form a semantic field, but not all words fit neatly into these groups. Understanding semantic fields. Knowing how words are grouped in both the source and target languages helps translators understand the value of a word choice. For example, English distinguishes between cold and cool, while Arabic doesn't. So, translating cold into Arabic might not capture the same meaning accurately. Hierarchy in semantic fields. Words in a semantic field are organized from general to specific. For example, vehicle is a general term, and bus and car are specific types of vehicles. This hierarchy can help translators find alternatives when there are gaps in meaning between languages. Flexibility of semantic fields. Semantic fields change over time as languages evolve. New words are added, and old ones may become less relevant. This dynamic nature makes translation challenging, but also interesting. Common problems of non-equivalence. Culture-specific concepts. Words like privacy in English or speaker in the context of the House of Commons may not have equivalents in other languages. Concepts not lexicalized. Some concepts like savory or standard might not have direct translations in certain languages. Example: savory doesn't have a direct equivalent in many languages. Semantically complex words. Words like arruação in Brazilian Portuguese, which means a specific action related to coffee farming, can be challenging to translate. Example: arruação in Brazilian Portuguese has a very specific meaning related to coffee farming. Different distinctions in meaning. Languages may distinguish meanings differently. For example, Indonesian distinguishes between going out in the rain knowingly and unknowingly, while English doesn't. Lack of superordinate or hyponym. Some languages may have specific words for concepts, but lack a general term or vice versa. Example: English has many specific words under article, like feature or survey, which may not have equivalents in other languages. Expressive meaning differences. Words may have the same basic meaning, but carry different emotional tones. Example: homosexuality in English may not carry the same neutral tone as its equivalent shithuth jinsi in Arabic. Differences in form. Some language forms like suffixes or prefixes may not have equivalents in other languages. Example: English uses ish or able endings frequently, which may not exist in other languages. Loanwords and false friends. Loanwords from one language to another may not carry the same connotations or meanings. Additionally, false friends, words that look similar in different languages but mean different things, can cause confusion for translators. Example: dilettante is a loanword in English, Russian, and Japanese, but Arabic has no equivalent loanword. Example for false friend is the word feminist, meaning a man who is soft with women in Japanese. Strategies used by professional translators. Translation by a more general word, superordinate. This is one of the commonest strategies for dealing with many types of non-equivalence, particularly in the area of propositional meaning. What it means is using a broader term to cover the core meaning of a missing specific word in the target language. Example: instead of revolved, the Spanish translation uses giraba, revolved, which is a more general term covering the concept. Translation by a more neutral, less expressive word, choosing a word with less emotional tone to convey the meaning in a neutral way. Example: instead of mumbles, the Italian translation uses suggeris, suggests, which is a more neutral term. Retaining expressive meaning by adding a modifier. Adding a modifier to retain the expressive meaning of a word in the target language. Example: in the English translation of phalansteri, the word ugly is added to convey the pejorative connotation that exists in the Italian original text. Translation by cultural substitution. This strategy involves replacing a culture-specific item or expression with something from the target language that may not have the same literal meaning but has a similar impact on the reader. Example A. Instead of using a story about a scientist and an old lady, the Greek translation substitutes characters from Alice in Wonderland to make the text more relatable and engaging for Greek readers. Example B. Instead of cream tea, which is a British tradition, the Italian translation substitutes it with pastry, a familiar concept to Italian readers, even though it doesn't carry the exact same meaning. Example C. The Italian word porca has a specific cultural connotation, which is replaced with bitch in English to convey a similar expressive meaning, despite the literal differences in meaning between the two words. Translation using a loanword or loanword plus explanation. This strategy is commonly used for culture-specific items, modern concepts, and buzzwords. It involves either directly using a word from the source language or using a loanword with an explanation in the target language, especially when the word is repeated in the text. Example A. Instead of translating cream tea into German, the phrase is used as a loanword, accompanied by hyphens to maintain clarity. This allows German readers familiar with English customs to understand without further explanation. Example B. The Japanese translation of shamanic practices uses shaman as a loanword, written in katakana script, and adds a suffix to convey the English ic ending. This helps convey the meaning to Japanese readers. Example D and E. In Japanese translations, phrases like morning coffee, traditional cream teas, and unique motor museum are used as loanwords to evoke a modern, sophisticated atmosphere, even though Japanese equivalents exist. This emphasizes the mood or feeling rather than just the literal meaning. The decision to use loanwords often depends on the translation norms in a society, with some languages being more tolerant of loanwords than others. Translation by paraphrase using a related word. This strategy tends to be used when the concept expressed by the source item is lexicalized in the target language but in a different form, and when the frequency with which a certain form is used in the source text is significantly higher than would be natural in the target language. Example A. Instead of directly translating hot and cold food and drinks, the German version uses warm und kalte Speisen und Getränke, which means warm and cold meals and drinks. Both convey the idea of food and drinks with different temperatures. Example B. Instead of translating rich and creamy directly, the text describes the product as easy to apply and having a pleasant fragrance, conveying similar qualities in a different way. Example C. Instead of directly translating related to, the back-translated Chinese text uses have a kinship relation with, conveying the same idea of a close connection between giant pandas and bears. Example D. Instead of directly translating enviable location, the French version uses situation enviable and describes the other facilities in a similar manner, providing equivalent meaning in a different form. Translation by paraphrase using unrelated words occurs when the concept expressed by the source word doesn't exist in the target language. Instead of finding a related word, the translator may use a completely different phrase to convey the same meaning. Example D. Instead of using the loanword al fresco, which means in the open air, the German translation describes the same concept by saying sit and eat on the terrace in the open. While both convey the idea of dining outdoors, The German version uses different words. Example E. Instead of directly translating worldview, the back-translated Japanese text describes it as the image of another miraculous dimension, which can causally influence each other mutually with the daily world, conveying a similar meaning but with different words. Example F. Instead of directly translating disturbed by, the back-translated Chinese text uses interfere most, conveying a similar idea but with different words. The advantage of this strategy is precision in conveying the meaning, but it may lack the expressive or evoked meanings associated with stable lexical items. Additionally, it can be cumbersome and awkward to use because it involves explaining a single word with several other words. Translation by omission means leaving out a word or expression in the translated text when it's not essential for understanding. Translation by illustration involves using images to convey the meaning of a word or concept that doesn't have an equivalent in the target language, particularly if there are restrictions on space and if the text has to remain short, concise, and to the point. For example, if a word like tagged in English is difficult to translate into Arabic without lengthy explanations, an illustration of a tagged tea bag can be used instead. Lexical patterning refers to the way words tend to appear together in a language. There are two main aspects. Collocation. This is when certain words often appear together in a language. For example, cheek is more likely to appear with words like money, pay, and bank rather than moon, butter, or repair. Every word in a language can be said to have a range of items with which it is compatible to a greater or lesser degree. Range here refers to the set of collocates. Every word has a set of words it's commonly used with, which we call its collocates. The range of collocates for a word can vary depending on how specific or general the word is. General words like berry have a wider range of collocates, while specific words have a narrower range. The number of senses a word has also affects its collocational range. Words with multiple meanings may have different collocates depending on the context. Idioms and fixed expressions. These are phrases or sayings where the meaning of the whole expression cannot be inferred from the meanings of the individual words. For example, kick the bucket means to die, but it doesn't literally involve kicking a bucket. Sometimes, writers or speakers use marked collocations to create new and unusual combinations of words, which can evoke unique images or meanings.